Hello and welcome. My name is Joe and I am the Panicked Monk, and you are watching The Mini Adventures of Derkara. We're going to pick up at Millwater Retreat. Derkara is going to do some building, and I thought we would continue where we left off with A Dance in Fire. This is probably my favorite book series in the game, and there are several more books to get through, and I thought it would be nice to just kind of continue that series and the general relax, chill kind of vibe, I guess, for lack of a better word. But anyway, once I finish the book series, I promise I'll give you a break and we'll get back to more traditional Derkara episodes, I guess. So until then, though, we'll see how much Derkara can finish up while I continue A Dance in Fire by Wogan Jarth. Book 3. Mother Pascost disappeared into the sordid hole that was her tavern, and emerged a moment later with a scrap of paper with Leodis Juris's familiar scrawl. Decuma's Scotty held it up before a patch of sunlight that had found its way through the massive boughs of the tree city, and read, "Scotty, so you made it to Fallen SD Valenwood. Congratulations. I'm sure you had quite an adventure getting here. Unfortunately, I'm not here anymore, as you probably guess. There's a town downriver called Athy I'm at. Get a boat and join me. It's ideal. I hope you brought a lot of contracts, because these people need a lot of building done. They were close to the war, you see, but not so close they don't have any money left to pay. Haha. Meet me down here as soon as you can. Juris." So Scotty pondered. Juris had left Fallen SD and gone to some place called Athy. Given his poor penmanship and ghastly spelling, it could equally well be Athy, Affy, O3, M3, Ur3, or Krakamaka. The sensible thing to do, Scotty knew, was to call this adventure over and try to find some way to get back home to the Imperial City. He was no mercenary devoted to a life of thrills. He was, or at least had been, a senior clerk at a successful private building commission. Over the last few weeks, he had been robbed by the Cathay-Rat, taken on a death march through the jungle by a gang of giggling Bosmeri, half-starved to death, drugged with fermented pig's milk, nearly slain by some kind of giant tick, and attacked by archers. He was filthy, exhausted, and had, he counted, 10 gold pieces to his name. Now the man whose proposal brought him to the depths of misery was not even there. It was both judicious and seemly to abandon the enterprise entirely. And yet, a small but distinct voice in his head told him, "You have been chosen. You have no other choice but to see this through." Scotty turned to the stout old woman, Mother Pascost, who had been watching him curiously. "I was wondering if you knew of a village that was at the edge of the recent conflict with Elsewhere. It's called something like Athy? You must mean Athay," she grinned. "My middle lad, Viglil, he manages the dairy down there. Beautiful country, right on the river. Is that where your friend went?" "Yes," said Scotty. "Do you know the fastest way to get there?" After a short conversation, an even shorter ride to Fallen SD's roots by way of the platforms, and a jog to the riverbank, Scotty was negotiating transport with a huge fair-haired Bosmer with a face like a pickled carp. He called himself Captain Balfix. But even Scotty, with his sheltered life, could recognize him for what he was. A retired pirate for hire, a smuggler for certain, and probably much worse. His ship, which had clearly been stolen in the distant past, was a bent old imperial sloop. 50 gold and we'll be in Athay in 2 days' time, boomed Captain Balfix expansively. I have 10, no, sorry, 9 gold pieces, replied Scotty, and feeling the need for explanation added, I had 10, but I gave one to the platform ferryman to get me down here. 9 is just as fine, said the captain agreeably. Truth be told, I was going to Athay whether you paid me or not. Make yourself comfortable on the boat. We'll be leaving in just a few minutes. Dekumus Scotty boarded the vessel, which sat low in the water of the river, stacked high with crates and sacks that spilled out of the hold and galley and onto the deck. Each was marked with stamps advertising the most innocuous substances: copper scraps, lard, ink, high rock metal marked for cattle, tar, fish jelly. Scotty's imagination reeled, picturing what sorts of illicit imports were truly aboard. It took more than a few minutes for Captain Balfix to haul in the rest of his cargo, but in an hour, the anchor was up and they were sailing downriver towards Athay. The green-gray water barely rippled, only touched by the fingers of the breeze. Lush plant life crowded the banks, obscuring from sight all the animals that sang and roared at one another. Lulled by the serene soundings, Scotty drifted to sleep. At night, he awoke and gratefully accepted some clean clothes and food from Captain Balfix. Why are you going to Athay, if I may ask? Queried the Bosmer. I'm meeting a former colleague there. He asked me to come down from the Imperial City, where I worked for the Atreus Building Commission, to negotiate some contracts. Scotty took another bite of the dried sausages they were sharing for dinner. We're going to try to repair and refurbish whatever bridges, roads, and other structures that got damaged in the recent war with the Khajiit. It's been a hard 2 years, the captain nodded his head. Though I suppose good for me and the likes of you and your friend. Trade routes cut off. Now they think there's going to be war with the Somerset Isles. You heard that? Scotty shook his head. I've done my share of smuggling skooma down the coast, even helping some revolutionary types escape the Maine's wrath. But now the war's made me a legitimate trader, a businessman. The first casualties of war is always the corrupted. Scotty said he was sorry to hear that, and they lapsed into silence, watching the stars and moon's reflection on the still water. The next day, Scotty awoke to find the captain wrapped up in his sail, torpid from alcohol, singing in a low, slurred voice. When he saw Scotty arise, he offered his flagon of jaga. I've learned my lesson during revelry at the Western Cross. The captain laughed and then burst into tears. I don't want to be legitimate. Other pirates I used to know are still raping and stealing and smuggling and selling nice folk like you into slavery. I swear to you, I never thought the first time that I ran a real shipment of legal goods that my life would turn out like this. Oh, I know, I could go back to it, but Bandar knows not after all I've seen. I'm a ruined man. Scotty helped the weeping Mur out of the sail, murmuring words of reassurance, then added, Forgive me for changing the subject, but where are we? Oh, moaned Captain Balfix miserably. We made good time. Athay is right around the bend in the river. Then it looks like Athay's on fire, said Scotty, pointing. A great plume of smoke, black as pitch, was rising above the trees. As they drifted around the bend, they next saw the flames, and then the blackened skeletal remains of the village. Dying, blazing villagers leapt from the rocks into the river. A cacophony of wailing met their ears, and they could see, roaming along the edges of the town, the figures of Khajiit soldiers bearing torches. Bandar bless me, slurred the captain. The war's back on. "Oh no," whimpered Scotty. The sloop drifted with the current towards the opposite shore away from the fiery town. Scotty turned his attention there and the sanctuary it offered. Just a peaceful arbor away from the horror. There was a shudder of leaves in 2 of the trees, and a dozen lithe Khajiit dropped to the ground, armed with bows. "They see us," hissed Scotty, "and they've got bows." "Well, of course they've got bows," snarled Captain Balfix. "We Bosmer may have invented the bloody things, but we didn't think to keep them secret, you bloody bureaucrat. Now they're setting the arrows on fire. Yes, they do that sometimes. Captain, they're shooting at us. They're shooting at us with flaming arrows." "Ah, so they are," the captain agreed. "The aim here is to avoid being hit." But hit they were, and very shortly thereafter. Even worse, the second volley of arrows hit the supply of pitch, which ignited in a tremendous blue blaze. Scotty grabbed Captain Balfix and they leapt overboard just before the ship and all its cargo disintegrated. The shock of the cold water brought the Bosmer into temporary sobriety. He called to Scotty, who was already swimming as fast as he could toward the bend. "Master Decumus, where do you think you are swimming to?" "Back to Fallen Esti," cried Scotty. "It will take you days, and by the time you get there, everyone will know about the attack on Athe. They'll never let anyone they don't know in. The closest village downriver is Grenos. Maybe they'll give us shelter." Scotty swam back to the captain, and side by side, they began paddling in the middle of the river, past the burning residuum of the village. He thanked Mara that he had learned to swim. Many a Cyrodiil did not, as largely landlocked as the imperial province was. Had he been raised in Mir Korup or Ardaman, he might have been doomed. But the imperial city itself was encircled by water, and every lad and lass there knew how to cross it without a boat. Even those who grew up to be clerks and not adventurers. Captain Balfix's sobriety faded as he grew used to the water's temperature. Even in wintertide, the Xylo River was fairly temperate, and after a fashion, even comfortable. The Bosmer's strokes were uneven, and he strayed closer to Scotty and then further away, pushing ahead and then falling behind. Scotty looked at the shore to his right. The flames had caught the trees like tinder. Behind them was an inferno, with which they were barely keeping pace. To the shore on their left, all looked fair until he saw a tremble in the river reeds, and then what caused it? A pride of the largest cats he had ever seen. They were auburn-haired, green-eyed beasts with jaws and teeth to match his wildest nightmares, and they were watching the 2 swimmers and keeping pace. "Captain Balfix, we can't go to either that shore or the other one, or we'll be parboiled or eaten," Scotty whimpered. "Try to even your kicking and your strokes. Breathe like you would normally. If you're feeling tired, tell me, and we'll float on our backs for a while." Anyone who has had the experience of giving rational advice to a drunkard would understand the hopelessness. Scotty kept pace with the captain, slowing himself, quickening, drifting left and right, while the Bosmer moaned old ditties from his pirate days. When he wasn't watching his companion, he watched the cats on the shore. After a stretch, he turned to his right. Another village had caught fire. Undoubtedly, it was Grenos. Scotty stared at the blazing fury, awed by the sight of the destruction, and did not hear that the captain had ceased to sing. When he turned back, Captain Balfix was gone. Scotty dove into the murky depths of the river over and over again. There was nothing to be done. When he surfaced after his final search, he saw that the giant cats had moved on, perhaps assuming that he too had drowned. He continued his lonely swim downriver. A tributary, he noted, had formed a final barrier, keeping the flames from spreading further. But there were no more towns. After several hours, he began to ponder the wisdom of going ashore. Which shore was the question. He was spared the decision. Ahead of him was a rocky island with a bonfire. He did not know if he were intruding on a party of Bosmeri or Khajiit, only that he could swim no more. With straining, aching muscles, he pulled himself onto the rocks. They were Bosmer refugees, he gathered, even before they told him. Roasting over the fire was the remains of one of the giant cats that had been stalking him through the jungle on the opposite shore. "Senche tiger," said one of the young warriors ravenously. "It's no animal. It's as smart as any Cathay Rat, or Omis, or any other bleeding Khajiit. Pity this one drowned. I would have gladly killed it. You like the meat, though. Sweet, from all the sugar these asses eat." Scotty did not know if he was capable of eating a creature as intelligent as a man or Mer, but he surprised himself, as he had done several times over the last days. It was rich, succulent, and sweet, like sugared pork, but no seasonings had been added. He surveyed the crowd as he ate. A sad lot, some still weeping for lost family members. They were the survivors of both the villages of Grenos and Athay, and war was on every person's lips. Why had the Khajiit attacked again? Why, specifically directed at Scotty as a Cyrodiil? Why was the Emperor not enforcing peace in his provinces? "I was to meet another Cyrodiil," he said to a Bosmer maiden who he understood to be from Athay. "His name was Leotis Juris. I don't suppose you know what might have happened to him." "I don't know your friend, but there were many Cyrodiils in Athay when the fire came," said the girl. "Some of them, I think, left quickly. They were going to Vindisi, inland, in the jungle." "I don't know your friend, but there were many Cyrodiils in Athay when the fire came," said the girl. "Some of them, I think, left quickly. They were going to Vindisi, inland in the jungle." "I'm going there tomorrow. So are many of us. If you wish, you may come as well." Takuma Scotty nodded solemnly. He made himself as comfortable as he could in the stony ground of the river island, and somehow, after much effort, he fell asleep. But he did not sleep well. Book 4. 18 Bosmeri and 1 Cyrodiilic former senior clerk for an Imperial Building Commission trudged through the jungle westward from the Xylo River to the ancient village of Vindisi. For Takuma Scotty, the jungle was hostile, unfamiliar ground. The enormous vermiculated trees filled the bright morning with darkness and resembled nothing so much as grasping claws bent on impeding their progress. Even the fronds of the low plants quivered with malevolent energy. What was worse, he was not alone in his anxiety. His fellow travelers, the natives who had survived the Khajiit attacks on the villages of Grenos and Athay, wore faces of undisguised fear. There was something sentient in the jungle, and not merely the mad but benevolent indigenous spirits. In his peripheral vision, Scotty could see the shadows of Khajiit following the refugees, leaping from tree to tree. When he turned to face them, the lithe forms vanished into the gloom as if they had never been there. But he knew he had seen them, and the Bosmeri saw them too, and quickened their pace. After 18 hours, bitten raw by insects, scratched by 1,000 thorns, they emerged into a valley clearing. It was night, but a row of blazing torches greeted them, illuminating the leather-wrought tents and jumbled stones of the hamlet of Vindisi. At the end of the valley, the torches marked a sacred site, a gnarled bower of trees pressed close together to form a temple. Wordlessly, the Bosmeri walked to the torch arcade toward the trees. Scotty followed them. When they reached the solid mass of living wood with only one gaping portal, Scotty could see a dim blue light glowing within. A low, sonorous moan from 100 voices echoed within. The Bosmeri maiden he had been following held out her hand, stopping him. "You do not understand, but no outsider, not even a friend, may enter," she said. "This is a holy place." Scotty nodded and watched the refugees march into the temple, heads bowed. Their voices joined with the ones within. When the last wood elf had gone inside, Scotty turned his attention back to the village. There must be food to be had somewhere. A tendril of smoke and a faint whiff of roasting venison beyond the torchlight led him. There were 5 Cyrodiils, 2 Bretons, and a Nord. The group gathered around a campfire of glowing white stones, pulling steaming strips of meat from the cadaver of a great stag. At Scotty's approach, they rose up, all but the Nord, who was distracted by his hunk of animal flesh. "Good evening. Sorry to interrupt, but I was wondering if I might have a little something to eat. I'm afraid I'm rather hungry after walking all day with some refugees from Grenos and Athay." They bade him to sit down and eat, and introduced themselves. "So the war's back on, it seems," said Scotty amiably. "Best thing for these effete do-nothings," replied the Nord in between bites. "I've never seen such a lazy culture. Now they've got the Khajiit striking them on land and the High Elves at sea. If there's any province that deserves a little distress, it's damnable Valenwood." "I don't see how they're so offensive to you," laughed one of the Bretons. "They're congenial thieves, even worse than the Khajiiti because they are so blessed meek in their aggression." The Nord spat out a gob of fat which sizzled on the hot stones of the fire. "They spread their forests into territory that doesn't belong to them slowly, infiltrating their neighbors, and they're puzzled when elsewhere shoves back at them. They're all villains of the worst order." "What are you doing here?" asked Scotty. "I'm a diplomat from the court of Johanna," muttered the Nord, returning to his food. "What about you? What are you doing here?" asked one of the Cyrodiils. "I work for Lord Atreus's building commission in the Imperial City," said Scotty. "One of my former colleagues suggested that I come down to Valenwood. He said the war was over, and I could contract a great deal of business for my firm rebuilding what was lost. One disaster after another, and I've lost all my money. I'm in the middle of a rekindling of war, and I cannot find my former colleague." "Your former colleague," murmured another of the Cyrodiils, who had introduced himself as Reglius. "He wasn't by any chance named Leotis Juris, was he? You know him?" "He lured me down to Valenwood in nearly the exact same circumstances," smiled Reglius grimly. "I worked for your employer's competitor, Lord Venexman, where Leotis Juris also formerly worked. He wrote to me asking that I represent an Imperial building commission and contract some post-war construction. I had just been released from my former employment, and I thought that if I brought some new business, I could have my job back. Juris and I met in Athay, and he said he was going to arrange a very lucrative meeting with the Sylvanar." Scotty was stunned. "Where is he now?" "I'm no theologian, so I couldn't say," Reglius shrugged. "He's dead. When the Khajiiti attacked Athay, they began by torching the harbor where Juris was readying his boat. Or, I should say, my boat, since it was purchased with the gold that I brought. By the time we were even aware of what was happening enough to flee, everything by the water was ash. The Khajiiti may be animals, but they know how to arrange an attack." "I think they followed us through the jungle to Vindisi," said Scotty nervously. There was definitely a group of something jumping along the treetops. "Probably one of the monkey folk," snorted the Nord. "Nothing to be concerned about." "When we first came to Vindisi, and the Bosmer all entered that tree, they were furious, whispering something about unleashing an ancient terror on their enemies." The Breton shivered, remembering. They've been there ever since, for over a day and a half now. If you want something to be afraid of, that's the direction to look. The other Breton, who was a representative of the Daggerfall Mages Guild, was staring off into the darkness while his fellow provincial spoke. "Maybe, but there's something in the jungle too, right on the edge of the village looking in." "More refugees maybe?" asked Scotty, trying to keep the alarm out of his voice. "Not unless they're traveling through the trees now," whispered the wizard. The Nord and one of the Cyrodiils grabbed a long tarp of wet leather and pulled it across the fire, instantly extinguishing it without so much as a sizzle. Now Scotty could see the intruders, the elliptical yellow eyes and long cruel blades catching the torchlight. He froze with fear, praying that he too was not so visible to them. He felt something bump against his back and gasped. Reglius's voice hissed from above. "Be quiet for Mara's sake and climb up here." Scotty grabbed hold of the knotted double vine that hung down from the tall tree at the edge of the dead campfire. He scrambled up it quickly as he could, holding his breath lest any grunt of exertion escape him. At the top of the vine, high above the village, was an abandoned nest from some great bird in a trident-shaped branch. As soon as Scotty had pulled himself into the soft, fragrant straw, Reglius pulled up the vine. No one else was there, and when Scotty looked down, he could see no one below. No one, that is, except the Khajiit, slowly moving toward the glow of the temple tree. "Thank you," whispered Scotty, deeply touched that a competitor had helped him. He turned away from the village and saw that the tree's upper branches brushed against the mossy rock walls that surrounded the valley below. "How are you at climbing?" "You're mad," said Reglius under his breath. "We should stay here until they leave. If they burn Vindisi like they did Athay and Grenos, we'll be dead sure as if we were on the ground." Scotty began the slow, careful climb up the tree, testing each branch. "Can you see what they're doing?" "I can't really tell." Reglius stared down into the gloom. "They're at the front of the temple. I think they also have, it looks like long ropes trailing off behind them, off into the pass." Scotty crawled onto the strongest branch that pointed toward the wet, rocky face of the cliff. It was not a far jump at all. So close, in fact, that he could smell the moisture and feel the coolness of the stone. But it was a jump nevertheless, and in his history as a clerk, he had never before leapt from a tree 100 feet off the ground to a sheer rock. He pictured in his mind the shadows that had pursued him through the jungle from the heights above, how their legs coiled to spring, how their arms snapped forward in an elegant, fluid motion to grasp. He leapt. His hands grappled for rock, but long, thick cords of moss were more accessible. He held hard, but when he tried to plant his feet forward, they slipped up skyward. For a few seconds, he found himself upside down before he managed to pull himself into a more conventional position. There was a narrow outcropping jutting out from the cliff where he could stand and finally exhale. "Reglius! Reglius! Reglius!" Scotty did not dare to call out. In a minute, there was a shaking of branches, and Lord Vinek's man emerged. First his satchel, then his head, then the rest of him. Scotty started to whisper something, but Reglius shook his head violently and pointed downward. One of the Khajiit was at the base of the tree, peering at the remains of the campfire. Reglius awkwardly tried to balance himself on the branch, but as strong as it was exceedingly difficult with only one free hand. Scotty cupped his palms and then pointed at the satchel. It seemed to pain Reglius to let it out of his grasp, but he relented and tossed it to Scotty. There was a small, almost invisible hole in the bag, and when Scotty caught it, a single gold coin dropped out. It rang as it bounced against the rock wall on the descent, a high, soft sound that seemed like the loudest alarm Scotty had ever heard. Then many things happened very quickly. The Cathay-Rot at the base of the tree looked up and gave a loud wail. The other Khajiit followed in chorus as the cat below crouched down and then sprang up into the lower branches. Reglius saw it below him, climbing up with impossible dexterity, and panicked. Even before he jumped, Scotty could tell that he was going to fall. With a cry, Reglius the clerk plunged to the ground, breaking his neck on impact. A flash of white fur erupted from every crevice of the temple, and the moan of the Bosmeri prayer changed into something terrible and otherworldly. The climbing Cathay-Rot stopped and stared. "Kirgo," it gasped. "The wild hunt!" It was as if a crack in reality had opened wide. A flood of horrific beasts, tentacled toads, insects of armor and spine, gelatinous serpents, vaporous beings with the face of gods, all poured forth from the great hollow tree, blind with fury. They tore at the Khajiit in front of the temple to pieces. All the other cats fled for the jungle, but as they did so, they began pulling on the ropes they carried. In a few seconds' time, the entire village of Vindizi was boiling with the lunatic apparitions of the wild hunt. Over the babbling, barking, howling horde, Scotty heard the Cyrodiils in hiding cry out as they were devoured. The Nord too was found and eaten, and both Bretons. The wizard had turned himself invisible, but the swarm did not rely on their sight. The tree the Cathay-Rot was in began to sway and rock from the impossible violence beneath it. Scotty looked at the Khajiit's fear-struck eyes and held out one of his cords of moss. The cat's face showed its pitiful gratitude as it leapt for the vine. It didn't have time to entirely replace that expression when Scotty pulled back the cord and watched it fall. The hunt consumed it to the bone before it struck the ground. Scotty's own jump up to the next outcropping of rock was immeasurably more successful. From there, he pulled himself to the top of the cliff and was able to look down into the chaos that had been the village of Vindizi. The hunt's mass had grown and began to spill out through the pass out of the valley, pursuing the fleeing Khajiit. It was then that the madness truly began. In the moon's light, from Scotty's vantage, he could see where the Khajiit had attached their ropes. With a thunderous boom, an avalanche of boulders poured over the pass. When the dust cleared, he saw that the valley had been sealed. The wild hunt had nowhere to turn but on itself. Scotty turned his head, unable to bear to look at the cannibalistic orgy. The night jungle stood before him, a web of wood. He slung Reglius's satchel over his shoulder and entered. And thus ends Book 4 of A Dance in Fire. Until next time, safe travels.